The Ascent of Mount Carmel by St. John of the Cross. Book 1, Chapter 3, speaks of the first cause of this night, which is that of the privation of the desire in all things, and gives the reason for which it is called night. We here describe as night the privation of every kind of pleasure which belongs to the desire. For even as night is nothing but the privation of light, and consequently of all objects that can be seen by means of light, whereby the visual faculty remains unoccupied and in darkness, even so, likewise the mortification of desire may be called night to the soul. For when the soul is deprived of the pleasure of its desire in all things, it remains, as it were, unoccupied, and in darkness. For even as the visual faculty, by means of light, is nourished and fed by objects which can be seen, and which, when the light is quenched, are not seen, even so, by means of the desire, the soul is nourished and fed by all things wherein it can take pleasure according to its faculties. And when this also is quenched, or rather mortified, the soul ceases to feed upon the pleasure of all things, and thus, with respect to its desire, it remains unoccupied and in darkness. Let us take an example from each of the faculties. When the soul deprives its desire of the pleasure of all that can delight the sense of hearing, the soul remains unoccupied and in darkness with respect to this faculty. And when it deprives itself of the pleasure of all that can please the sense of sight, it remains unoccupied and in darkness with respect to this faculty also. And when it deprives itself of the pleasure of all the sweetness of perfumes which can give it pleasure through the sense of smell, it remains equally unoccupied and in darkness according to this faculty. And if it also denies itself the pleasure of all food that can satisfy the palate, the soul likewise remains unoccupied and in darkness. And finally, when the soul mortifies itself with respect to all the delights and pleasures that it can receive from the sense of touch, it remains in the same way unoccupied and in darkness with respect to this faculty. So that the soul that has denied and thrust away from itself the pleasures which come from all these things, and has mortified its desire with respect to them, may be said to be, as it were, in the darkness of night, which is nothing else than an emptiness within itself of all things. The reason for this is that, as the philosophers say, the soul, as soon as God infuses it into the body, is like a smooth blank board upon which nothing is painted, and, save for that which it experiences through the senses, nothing is communicated to it in the course of nature from any other source. And thus, for as long as it is in the body, it is like one who is in a dark prison and who knows nothing, save what he is able to see through the windows of the said prison. And if he saw nothing through them, he would see nothing in any other way. And thus the soul, save for that which is communicated to it through the senses, which are the windows of its prison, could acquire nothing in the course of nature in any other way. Wherefore, if the soul rejects and denies that which it can receive through the senses, we can quite well say that it remains, as it were, in darkness and empty, since, as appears from what has been said, no light can enter it in the course of nature by any other means of illumination than those aforementioned. For although it is true that the soul cannot help hearing and seeing and smelling and tasting and touching, this is of no greater import, nor, if the soul denies and rejects the object, Is it hindered more than if it saw it not, heard it not, etc.? Just so, a man who desires to shut his eyes will remain in darkness, like the blind man who has no faculty of sight. And to this purpose David says these words, Pauper sum ego, et in laboribus a indenture mea, which signifies, I am poor, and in labors from my youth. He calls himself poor, although it is clear that he was rich, because his will was not set upon riches, and thus it was as though he really were poor. But if he had not been really poor, and had not been so in his will, he would not have been truly poor, for his soul, as far as its desire was concerned, would have been rich and replete. For this reason we call this detachment night to the soul, for we are not treating here of the lack of things, since this implies no detachment on the part of the soul if it has a desire for them. But we are treating of the detachment from them, of the taste and the desire. For it is this that leaves the soul free and void of them, although it may have them. For it is not the things of this world that either occupy the soul or cause it harm, since they enter it not, but rather the will and desire for them, for it is these that dwell within it. This first kind of night, as we shall say hereafter, belongs to the soul according to its sensual part, which is one of the two parts whereof we spoke above, through which the soul must pass in order to attain to union. Let us now say how meet it is for the soul to go forth from its house into this dark night of sense, in order to travel to union with God. Chapter 4. Wherein is declared how necessary it is for the soul to truly pass through this dark night of sense, which is mortification of desire, in order that it may journey to union with God. The reason for which it is necessary for the soul, in order to attain to divine union with God, to pass through this dark night of mortification of the desires and denial of pleasures in all things, is because all the affections which it has for creatures are pure darkness in the eyes of God. And when the soul is clothed in these affections, it has no capacity for being enlightened and possessed by the pure and simple light of God, if it first cast them not from it. For light cannot agree with darkness, since, as St. John says, Tenebrae eam non comprehenderunt, that is, the darkness could not receive the light. The reason is that two contraries, even as philosophy teaches us, cannot coexist in one person, and that darkness, which is affection set upon the creatures, and light, which is God, are contrary to each other, and have no likeness or accord between one another, even as St. Paul taught the Corinthians, saying, Quae conventio luci ad tenebras, that is to say, what communion can there be between light and darkness? Hence it is that the light of divine union cannot dwell in the soul if these affections first flee not away from it. In order that we may the better prove what has been said, it must be known that the affection and attachment which the soul has for creatures renders the soul like to these creatures, and the greater is its affection, the closer is the equality and likeness between them, for love creates a likeness between that which loves and that which is loved. For which reason David, speaking of those who set their affections upon idols, said thus, Similes illis fiant qui faciunt ea, et omnes qui confidunt in eis, which signifies, let them that set their heart upon them be like to them. And thus he that loves a creature becomes as low as that creature, and in some ways lower. For love not only makes the lover equal to the object of his love, but even subjects him to it, makes him a subject of it, of the love thing. Hence, in the same way, it comes to pass that the soul that loves anything else becomes incapable of pure union with God and transformation in him. For the low estate of the creature is much less capable of union with the high estate of the Creator than is darkness with light. For all things of earth and heaven, compared to God, are nothing, as Jeremiah says in these words, Aspexi terram, et ecce vacua erat, et nihil, et caelus, et non erat lux in eis. I beheld the earth, he says, and it was void, and it was nothing, and the heavens, and saw that they had no light. In saying that he beheld the earth void, he means that all its creatures were nothing, and that the earth was nothing likewise. And in saying that he beheld the heavens and saw no light in them, he says that all the luminaries of heaven, compared with God, are pure darkness, so that in this way all the creatures are nothing, and their affections, we may say, are less than nothing, since they are an impediment to transformation in God, and the privation thereof, even as darkness is not only nothing, but less than nothing, since it is privation of light. And even as he that is in darkness comprehends not the light, so the soul that sets its affection upon creatures will be unable to comprehend God, and until it be purged, it will neither be able to possess him here below through pure transformation of love, nor yonder in clear vision. And for greater clarity, we will now speak in greater detail. All the being of creation, then, compared with the infinite being of God, is nothing. And therefore the soul that sets its affection upon the being of creation is likewise nothing in the eyes of God, and less than nothing, for, as we have said, love makes equality and similitude, and even sets the lover below the object of his love. And therefore such a soul will in no wise be able to attain to union with the infinite being of God. For that which is not can have no communion with that which is. And coming down in detail to some examples, all the beauty of the creatures, compared with the infinite beauty of God, is the height of deformity. Even as Solomon says in the Proverbs, Fallax gratia et vana est pulchritudo. Favor is deceitful, and beauty is vain. And thus the soul that is affectioned to the beauty of any creature is the height of deformity in the eyes of God. And therefore this soul that is deformed will be unable to become transformed in beauty, which is God, since deformity cannot attain to beauty, and all the grace and beauty of the creatures, compared with the grace of God, is the height of misery and of uncomeliness. Wherefore the soul that is ravished by the graces and beauties of the creatures has only supreme misery and unattractiveness in the eyes of God, and thus it cannot be capable of the infinite grace and loveliness of God. For that which has no grace is far removed from that which is infinitely gracious, and all the goodness of the creatures of the world, in comparison with the infinite goodness of God, may be described as wickedness. for there is nothing good save only God. And therefore the soul that sets its heart upon the good things of the world is supremely evil in the eyes of God. And even as wickedness comprehends not goodness, even so such a soul cannot be united with God, who is supreme goodness. All the wisdom of the world and all human ability, compared with the infinite wisdom of God, are pure and supreme ignorance, even as St. Paul writes ad Corinthios, saying, Sapientia huius mundi stultitia et apud Deum. The wisdom of this world is foolishness with God. Wherefore any soul that makes account of all its knowledge and ability in order to come to union with the wisdom of God is supremely ignorant in the eyes of God, and will remain far removed from that wisdom. For ignorance knows not what wisdom is, even as St. Paul says that this wisdom seems foolishness to God, since in the eyes of God those who consider themselves to be persons with a certain amount of knowledge are very ignorant. So that the Apostle, writing to the Romans, says of them, Dicentes enim se esse sapienses stulti facti sunt. That is, professing themselves to be wise, they became foolish. And those alone acquire wisdom of God who are like ignorant children, and laying aside their knowledge, walk in his service with love. This manner of wisdom St. Paul taught likewise ad Corinthios. Si quis videtur inter vos sapiens esse in hoc saeculo, stultus fiat ut sit sapiens. Sapientia enim huius mundi stultitia ad apud Deum. That is, if any man among you seem to be wise, let him become ignorant, that he may be wise. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God. So that, in order to come to union with the wisdom of God, the soul has to proceed rather by unknowing than by knowing, and all the dominion and liberty of the world, compared with the liberty and dominion of the Spirit of God, is the most abject slavery, affliction, and captivity. Wherefore the soul that is enamored of prelacy, or of any other such office, and longs for liberty of desire, is considered and treated in the sight of God not as a son, but as a base slave and captive, since it has not been willing to accept his holy doctrine, wherein he teaches us that whoso would be greater must be less, and whoso would be less must be greater. And therefore such a soul will be unable to attain to that true liberty of spirit which is attained in his divine union. For slavery can have no part with liberty, and liberty cannot dwell in a heart that is subject to desires, for this is the heart of a slave. But it dwells in the free man, because he has the heart of a son. It was for this cause that Sarah bade her husband Abraham cast out the bondswoman and her son, saying that the son of the bondswoman should not be heir with the son of the free woman. And all the delights and pleasures of the will, in all the things of the world, in comparison with all those delights which are God, are supreme affliction, torment, and bitterness. And thus he that sets his heart upon them is considered in the sight of God as worthy of supreme affliction, torment, and bitterness, and thus he will be unable to attain to the delights of the embrace of union with God. since he is worthy of affliction and bitterness. All the wealth and glory of all creation, in comparison with the wealth which is God, is supreme poverty and wretchedness. Thus the soul that loves and possesses creature wealth is supremely poor and wretched in the sight of God, and for that reason will be unable to attain to that wealth and glory which is the state of transformation in God. For that which is miserable and poor is supremely far removed from that which is supremely rich and glorious. And therefore, divine wisdom, grieving for such as these who make themselves vile, low, miserable, and poor, because they love the things in this world which seem to them so rich and beautiful, addresses an exclamation to them in the Proverbs, saying, O viri, ad vos clamito, et vox mea ad filios hominum, intelligite te parvuli, astutiam, et incipientes animadvertite. Audite quia de rebus magnis locutura sum. And farther on he continues, Mecum sut divitiae, et gloria, opes superbe, et justitia. Melior est fructus meus auro, et lapide precioso, et genanima mea argento electo, in viis justitiae ambulo, in medio semitarum juditii, ut ditem diligentes mei, et thesauros eorum repleam. Which signifies, O ye men, to you I call, and my voice is to the sons of men. Attend, little ones, to subtlety and sagacity. Ye that are foolish, take notice. Hear, for I have to speak of great things. With me are riches and glory, high riches and justice. Better is the fruit that ye will find in me than gold and precious stones. And my generation, namely, that which ye will engender of me in your souls, is better than choice silver. I walk in the ways of justice, in the midst of the paths of judgment, that I may enrich those that love me, and fill their treasures perfectly. Herein, divine wisdom speaks to all those that set their hearts and affections upon anything of the world, according as we have already said. And she calls them little ones, because they make themselves like to that which they love, which is little. And therefore she tells them to be subtle, and to take note that she is treating of great things, and not of things that are little like themselves. That the great riches and the glory that they love are with her and in her, and not where they think. And that high riches and justice dwell in her. For although they think the things of this world to be all this, she tells them to take note that her things are better, saying that the fruit which they will find in them will be better for them than gold and precious stones, and that which she engenders in souls is better than the choice silver which they love, by which is understood any kind of affection that can be possessed in this life. Reader's note. The footnotes admit that the words often translated deformity, deformed, or vileness and vile are the ordinary contraries of beauty and beautiful, and might be rendered more literally but less elegantly ugliness and ugly. And yes, indeed, it is hermosura, hermoso, versus feedad and feo. I don't know why they have to get so overdramatic. You learn hermoso and feo in your first week of adjectives. End of chapters 3 and 4.